The Latino population is unique in a couple of different ways in how it has its impact. The first is that it's a relatively new population. So the Latino share of the national population is now about 15.5%. The Latino share of the electorate is only about 9% because of the number of non-citizen immigrants who are not yet eligible. However, they tend to be concentrated in several key states, and they have a larger swing ratio, meaning that between elections, the percentage of the population who votes for one party or the other actually moves a little bit more significantly than it does for, say, African Americans or Anglos. So they are a vote that both parties could conceivably compete for, and that makes them special. Critical, in my opinion. It was critical. There are states that we don't think of as being competitive, like California, but those are states that are not competitive sometimes in part because of Latino mobilization. So California was once a competitive state, now it's a safely democratic one. There are other states like Colorado, New Mexico, even places like North Carolina and Florida, where the Latino margin in the 2008 election exceeded the state margin. So they provided the winning margin in the state. It turns out that Latinos, there's certainly wide distributions of attitudes, but Latinos do not see themselves as particularly closely aligned or having a lot in common with either whites or blacks in the United States. They see themselves as somewhat distinct. When they're asked opinions about African Americans, it turns out that they frequently hold racialized opinions that are not inconsistent with what opinions whites hold. So there is prejudice towards African Americans among Latinos. Where you get a distinction is when it comes time to vote, which is I can't find any evidence that anti-black sentiment is affecting how Latinos vote, whereas we can find lots of evidence that anti-black sentiment affects how whites vote, for example. So I think there is a social division there. Race is an important structural problem in Latin America that creates a lot of social consternation. It's not surprising that when Latin Americans come to the United States, they still hold racial attitudes. This is not news, but they don't appear to affect the politics in the way that they affect white politics. We see these spasms of anti-immigrant legislative activity, anti-immigrant political organizing. They usually are associated with either electoral strategic choices being made by politicians who feel that they can get a short-term tactical gain out of immigrant bashing, or they're associated, or both, or they're associated with economic distress. So the United States is in a period where there's a high degree of unemployment. You have a series of elections. You have the first African American ever elected president of the United States. Creates quite a bit of social turmoil, as it were. And as a consequence, it's a moment where this sort of anti-immigrant sort of thing comes out. The effect is likely to be a short-term win for Republicans in the state of Arizona, but a long-term net loss. And the reason is that because Latinos are the fastest growing segment of the national population and the electorate, and who really don't like immigrant bashing, their partisan behavior over the course of time will become more significantly Democratic than it already was. In the short term, it may benefit the governor, Jan Brewer, who's trying to seek re-election. It's not clear, but it may. But in the long term, it's probably a loser for their party.